nobody discusses language maxing. Now, what's language maxing? Language maxing is when you strategize to get the most out of a language in the shortest amount of time as possible. So, what do I mean? So, we often hear from people like Stephen Krashen and Paul Nation about the input hypothesis. That is, that people receive their knowledge of a language from input, either partially or fully. Now, how exactly can we maximize this? I don't see too much discussion of it. I've seen people who have taken, say, TEDx talks, cut them down and watched them repeatedly for 30 days. But this doesn't strike me as a particularly good strategy for the mere fact that each of these TEDx talks don't actually have that much content in them. There needs to be a more long-term strategy going on here. Now, when we're dealing with the language, there are two important parts that need to be considered. First of all, there needs to be the grammar, and then there needs to be the vocabulary. The words and the way that the words are used to communicate meaning. And these need to be viewed in such a way that can be understood. Right? The question is, how do you cram in as many words as possible in the shortest possible time? Now, I think it's a pretty good idea to take notes from bodybuilders and from athletes on how they're able to train. Because these people are extremely diligent in their diets, and they're extremely diligent in their workouts and the structure of those workouts specifically. There are endless arguments about what is most effective, and this could really help a person develop in a language very quickly. I think that it's very important to start taking their view seriously. One of the things I came across actually when I was researching the athletic techniques used by the Soviets, and they were known for being very successful, is that they'd look at the genetic freaks. They'd look at the people who are able to get world records and then learn the techniques from them. This is something that we could do. I don't see much discussion of this in language learning. Because even if we're only trying to study one language, it surely helps us to do well with it. Right? They will often vary out different levels of routine. They'll try intensity. And in fact, we see a similar thing with Krashen, right? Because if you contrast American-style bodybuilding or American-style lifting where you simply linearly scale the weight with Soviet-style bodybuilding, which was actually about variability largely in the amount of reps that were taken as well as the intensity, you see that the Soviets turned out better, and this is actually somewhat reflective of Krashen, who will talk about getting lots of easy input as opposed to scaling up to different levels of works in order to gain a better understanding. I don't understand why people aren't doing this with languages, and so I'd like to suggest this. I'm going to call it language maxing, but anybody who wants to use another term, go ahead, and just suggest a few different ways that could provide fruit. So, we have this number of words. We have 3 million words. We have 534,000. We have 171,000. How do we get most effective in these words? And also remembering what kind of content is within these words. This isn't simply the same word over and over again. It's varied out. The sample used are novels, in fact. So how do we get the most words, the most bang for our buck within the shortest period of time? Now, the most important thing, I believe, is retaining interest in the text and being physically able to receive the content of the text. You know, it doesn't help us if we're reading 200,000 words and we've had 4 hours sleep and so we forget all the words after we've looked them up. So there has to be a focus on physical training as well, but also interest and familiarity with the text also needs to be taken account of. I think that as a language learner and really as a human being, the greatest thing that you can do is develop a familiarity with the Bible, not just because it's a highly deep text that's highly complicated and very interesting and provides a great amount of insight on how to live life, but also because there are so many different translations of the Bible into so many different languages that if you know the Bible well enough, you can simply pick up another language, start from the easiest books of the Bible, which from what I recall are the Gospel of John and the First Epistle of John, and simply just read through in difficulty order, building your way up to the level of, having 900,000 words under your belt, which is a pretty appreciable command of the language. Now, the language that's used isn't necessarily the most useful, but we must remember that although the Lord is mentioned a lot in the scriptures, also words like seen or the or have are also used very much so. So I recall, in fact, my wife's sister opposing this idea and saying, well, the words that are used in the scripture aren't necessarily the most useful, but they are. Additionally, there needs to be interesting content provided as well. I know for a fact, having learnt a lot of my Latin through reading the Vulgate Bible, that the Bible can get pretty dull at times. And so there needs to be variation, and preferably predictive variation in what's being read. There's no sense having this big collection of books that might be interesting and then just picking up a book and then having no idea which one you're going to pick up next after you're bored. There should be some sort of structure here. Now, I have no idea what this is going to look like for you, but I honestly am trying to get people to start thinking about this, so perhaps people can start writing courses on what sort of books should be read in order to reach a decent level in the language. I know something like this exists in Latin already, but this isn't necessarily the most effective, considering, according to Father William Most, that the teaching of Latin over the last 500 years has been abysmally poor. So I would also say have interesting books planned at the same time so that they can retain your interest if you ever get bored of the New Testament or any other book that you're reading. And then finally, don't forget to speak, don't forget to listen, don't forget to write. There should be some sort of way of developing up writing. I don't think it's too difficult once you've read a lot, because you can just simply imitate the styles that you see in the books that you've read or listened to when you're speaking. But this shouldn't be forgotten as well, because capability in a language isn't simply reading and listening. Even with a classical language, I would add. So, with all that said, this is just a set of thoughts on Languagemaxxing. People who are more experienced in learning languages might be able to expand this further. For reference, my experiences with languages are basically those I had in school, which were German, French, and Spanish. German and Spanish being the most developed, French being almost non-existent. And outside of that, Latin, bits of Koine Greek, little bits of Russian, and Esperanto. Most of this was dabbling. There are other languages as well that I've dabbled in, Coptic a bit, but I'd say that my biggest languages are Esperanto and Latin. So yeah, I'm far from some sort of experienced academic in second language acquisition, but I think that trying to think about this like a bodybuilder or think about this like an athlete might actually provide real benefits, not only for people who want to be polyglots, but also for people who simply want to study a language and get it done as quick as possible for work. If you're interested in learning languages such as Latin, I am providing Latin readers on my Patreon, so if you'd like to support this channel or to receive those readers, please go onto the Patreon in the description. Please like and subscribe and share this. I hope that I've provided some useful thoughts and some useful things to perhaps think about and expand. Thank you very much for watching.